Welcome to this video, which is just going to give you some general advice for answering questions in the HSC for science exams. As with anything like this is just general advice. You can take bits of it, which will work in some settings that may not work in other ones. Now, one of the things here, of course, general advice, don't do what Mr. Bean's doing here and cheat. That's not going to end well for anyone. But what you can do, and you need to start doing this well before the HSC exam obviously, is basically have an understanding of what's going on. All your courses have been written based on a syllabus. Your teachers have developed programs, they've developed resources for you to learn from. And the syllabuses currently are written in a certain way, which is they're inquiry based. So what's happening there is that you do activities in class. Now that might be experiments, that might be just second-hand investigations, looking at data. All those investigations, all those activities are done to build up your knowledge. And so it's inquiry based. You try and find information about things to build upon your knowledge. And so what we have there is that each module, and each Year 11, each Year 12 course has 4 modules per year, and each module has a series of inquiry questions. These then have content descriptors below them, which give a bit more detail, and they give examples and more understanding, definitions and things like that. HSC questions are built upon the inquiry questions. And so you have the inquiry questions, and then they can ask things about that, and they can also ask things about content descriptors. And the content descriptors give you more information. But the main focus is what the inquiry question is asking. And if you have a really good understanding of what the inquiry question is asking, and you should actually be able to do the content descriptors or answer anything about the content descriptors with little effort. Content descriptors in some way, examples of what's happening in the IQ, or just a little bit more information. But the inquiry question should be your main focus. Now, this is just a graphical representation of that there. So the inquiry question, content, and the content descriptors answer certain aspects of the inquiry question as well. And so, as I just said before, focus on the inquiry question. Now, one of the things I think you really should be doing to help aid that there is you study ideas. And what you probably want to do as a starting point is look at each inquiry question. So depending on the course, they've got usually about 3 to 4 inquiry questions per module, but they can be a little bit more, a little bit less. So take each inquiry question, give yourself a blank piece of paper, and just write the IQ at the top of the page. Think about this as being a 9-point HSC question. There's nothing in the new courses that says that they can't just ask you an inquiry question. So think about it that way. And you should be able to get 9 marks in 1 page. And then simply try and answer it. Don't look at the content descriptors. Just think about that inquiry question. Now, if you can't write an entire page, then you've got to think there that maybe you don't understand that inquiry question as well as maybe you thought you did. If your response is way beyond 1 page, then you've probably written too much. It's a very big danger in the HSC. 1, writing too little obviously means that you haven't written enough, but conversely, writing too much can also harm your final marks. Because you've got to remember there that you've got to explain clearly and coherently, which I'll talk about in a second. And when you write your responses, as was said there, don't just write everything you know. There's no problem in any of the science HSCs writing in dot points, small paragraphs. One of the worst things you can do, particularly on the extended response ones, so sort of 5, 6 and above, marks and above, is just writing one giant paragraph. Remember, when you're writing a response in the HSC, you're actually trying to show the marker that you understand the question and the concept. Write dot points, write subheadings, plan your answer in some cases there, particularly a 7 to 9 mark question. If you're going to have to ever respond to different things, write it in those dot points in the small paragraphs. One advantage as well of writing in small paragraphs is if you think of something that's going to aid your answer, it's a lot easier to insert it into into breaks between paragraphs than it is putting lines all over your page. And in the middle there, get to the point. Don't just try and write everything you know about a subject. You're not going to get to those higher bands. And it's that point there that I've highlighted. If you're going to get to a band 5, 6 level in these responses, you need to be clear, you need to be thorough, you need to get to the point. It is such an important concept to understand and answer in these questions. Now, of course, in different schools, there are different methods for formulating responses. I'm just going to go over one here, which is relatively easy and works well in most science exams, which is the Peel method. And look, it's really just a simple thing. There's a link there if you want to go and look at it in a little bit more detail. But you make a point, you show some evidence, you explain what you're doing, and you link them together. Now, you don't have to do it in any of these order. In some cases there, you might make your point and just have lots of evidence. You may not need to explain it, or you may just need to explain it and come back to it. I think the main thing is you make your point first. You back it up, and then you link it back to the question. And I think you really need to make sure that ultimately you're answering the question. And by doing it in this way, it can actually help you frame those questions there. As I said there, you make a point, you back it up. And even though it's not, if it's a 9-mark question, you don't have to make 9 separate points. If you're looking at a 4 or 5-mark response, probably make two points with a good explanation, or if the question's asking you to outline, maybe make 4 points. It's not a hard and fast rule, but you've got to think, if you're writing a 5-mark response and you just make 1 point, you're probably not going to get into those higher bands. So it's not a, depending on the marking guidelines, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it may help you. Planning and answering. Now, this is a thing here which takes that Peel point there and sort of goes into a little bit more detail. So when you're looking at your responses, really encourage you do not leave blank spaces. Because one of the things there in most HSC questions, particularly in science, if you write some relevant information, you're giving yourself a chance of at least getting 1 mark. And, in some cases there, that might be the difference between being a band 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever. It may just tick you over. If you really don't have any idea, just try and think of something and write that down. Now, of course, don't just write garbage, because you can run the risk of being in a non-serious attempt. But, you should have some knowledge of the different points there. As I said there, you may still show the marker that you have some understanding of the concepts in the course. And remember, the marker's job isn't to say you're good, bad, or indifferent. It's to judge whether you have an understanding, firstly, of what the question says, and secondly, that you have some course knowledge as well. And, you may not get the 3, 4 marks in the question, but you'll get something. And those 1 or 2 marks here and there can add up to a better response for you. Now, of course, another advantage of the approach of, particularly the Peel method, combining that with the idea of dot points, little subheadings or anything like that there, is that sometimes students get to a point where, they've spent a bit of time on one section of the paper and you've only got 20 minutes left. What I try and encourage students to do is, if you're not sure of a response, if you're running out of time, you can do something like a flowchart, brief dot point plan. Markers will try and mark everything on the page. They will see, have you related to the question? Are you showing understanding? Now, if it's a 5-mark question and you do that, you probably won't get the full marks. but you may get 2, you may get 3, you may have shown that you understand the concepts, you just haven't fleshed them out. And really, in the end, if you're showing the marker that you have an understanding, you're going to be in a good place with that. Here's an example. Now, this is an example from investigating science. And so this example here, you're just looking at an inquiry question. What initiates an investigation? So very early on in the HSC or the Year 12 course, you talk about Marshall and Warren. Now, if the question was what initiates an investigation, this was 9 marks, and you say, well, okay, I know Marshall and Warren, they observed bacterial biopsies in gastric ulcer patients. Then they discovered and said, well, do these bacteria cause the ulcers? They looked at more samples. Marshall tested it on himself, and they win a Nobel Prize. Now, if this was a 9-mark question, you're possibly looking at 3 to 4 marks just for this here. You, of course, then need to go in and explain it. But what also happens in this case here is that you're actually showing that you understand the overarching concepts. You would then, to get from, say, 4, 5 to 9 marks, you would then explain each of these bits in detail. So if these were subheadings, you then give more detail. And that's the way a lot of the HSC is marked. It's about, do you understand the overarching concept, and then give more detail. As I said there, the flowchart won't get you 9 marks, but it will get you a lot more than just 1 mark. It will also give you some structure. And so a lot of the things, the worst thing you can probably do in an exam is look at the question briefly and start writing without thinking about it. Frame your response. What are the points you need to make? If it's a 9-mark question, if it's a 7-mark question, do I need to make 3 or 4 points? What do each of those points mean? Elaborate on the points. We'll take you from that 3, 4, 5, maybe up to that 6, 7, 8, 9. And basically, if you can do that, and if you can start doing this across all the questions, you're going to move yourself up from those lower responses to those higher responses. Okay, thank you.